All right. So on today's episode of the California Underground, thanks for everyone for tuning in. We have a special guest. His name is Todd Madison. He's part of the California School Choice Foundation. Did I get that correct?
You did. Absolutely.
Great. He's going to be talking about, he originally reached out to me to talk about AB 1316, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I think this whole foundation is really interesting because of school choice and how it's going in California, how we can kind of put that issue out there from our parents to be aware of and generally learn more about school choice. So I guess I'll kick it off with Todd, letting you hop in, introduce yourself, talk about the organization a little bit just to get us rolling.
Sure. Absolutely. Thanks for having me here. Absolutely. I think it's really an issue that's time has come. I've been involved in education for quite some time. Sorry about that. Actually, my grandmother was a teacher in 1921 in North Dakota. She ran for school board in 1946 in the small town of Hibbing, Minnesota, where Bob Dylan is from. And ever since then, the family has had a history of being involved. I started being involved way back in the early 2010s, getting involved in my local school district and thinking that I could make for change on the inside. I spent many, many years working with committees and leading advisory committees and speaking at board meetings and so on. And eventually came to the conclusion that I just don't think that's going to happen. I think that we need to take the reins for ourselves. I think the people of California need to take the bit and run with it. Fortunately, we have the initiative process, and that's what the California School Choice Foundation is about. We're going to put an initiative on the ballot in 2022 to introduce a constitutional amendment to actually implement true school choice in the state of California. So that's what we're working towards.
Great. How close are you to, for people who aren't really familiar with getting a proposition started to get a constitutional amendment, just describe that process of what you're going through right now to get that going.
Sure. Yeah, it's not easy, of course. Fortunately, we have a good starting point. Senator John Morlock of Orange County put together some legislation a few years ago to put the Educational Freedom Act in place and an educational savings account. We used that as a starting point. So his language became a template. So we've got something that was already vetted and had been through the legislature, although, of course, it went nowhere at that point. So we're using that as a starting point. We're working through the legalities of it right now. The text is almost ready for the Secretary of State. We want to make sure that there's language in there that not only implements what we want in educational savings accounts, but also protects people who choose to use that for private schools, faith-based schools, homeschooling, so that they can share the benefits of that savings account without having the strings that come attached to it often when it comes to curriculum and control by the state over what they do. That goes into the Secretary of State in July. Early July, we hand it off to them. They go through their process. It pops out at the other end in September. September 10th is the deadline for that. At that point, we have a title on it and we can circulate it. And then we will be out in front of, grocery stores and home improvement centers and schools and churches and everywhere where you can see. We'll be out there looking for real signatures on it so that people can express their support.
Okay. And this is you're attempting to get this on the ballot for 2022.
Yeah. No, there's no way we can make it on 21. No.
Yeah. So kind of the timing is kind of apropos because of what has been going on with COVID and school closures. And I think a lot of parents have been finding out whether they wanted to or not, sort of the benefits of school choice and maybe taking their kids out of those public schools that were closed and finding religious schools or private charter schools. So this could be like a perfect time for this sort of proposition to be out there where parents are saying, this is a good idea. And I benefited from it. And I think the messaging is on your side. So I guess talk about a little bit about school choice as more support ramped up. Did you see it ramp up over the past year? Did you see a lot more support from people, a lot more interest of people just from COVID alone?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, as I said at the beginning, I've been involved in education in my district. I ran for school board last fall. And, I ran the district's parent advisory committee for 3 years, legally mandated committee. Every district's got to have one. I was in charge of it. And I can tell you that it was an eternal frustration to get people's attention in the past. I mean, we have 36,000 parents in my district, Oceanside Unified. And when we got 50 people to come to our district parent advisory committee, we were popping corks. It was just an outstanding, result to get that. I would go to board meetings and I would sit there and speak on issues where the board was going to take, say, $5 million away from the education of our kids and give it to themselves in pay raises and benefits. And I would be one of maybe 3 or 4 parents at that meeting. You just could not get the attention of parents. I mean, they just have this sort of knee-jerk reaction that, we love our schools, we love our teacher, whatever they say is what goes. And that's just the way it is. You can lay out the facts all you want. And unfortunately, people just don't pay that much attention. But over the last year, more than anything, I think parents and everyone has seen that the interests of our school districts are not necessarily aligned with the interests of our kids. The school districts, the management, the boards, they tend to protect themselves. It's normal human nature, really. They want to do what works best for themselves. And even though when their lips move, they talk about benefiting our kids and making things better for them and improving education, that's not actually what happens in reality. In reality, they do first and foremost what benefits the district and the district's employees. So now they can see that. More parents than ever can see that. There's a survey that just came out, California Policy Center. 54% of parents now believe that school choice is really an answer to this problem. And we've never had a majority before in the state. So I think there is no moment better than right now. There will be no moment better in our lifetimes than right now to make this happen.
Mm-hmm. So going off of that, I had dug into school choice a while back, and I think it was around the time that the teachers union here in California, the biggest one, it appeared they were holding schools hostages and students hostages. It seemed like that was the big controversy, is that they would not reopen schools unless they were paid X billions of dollars and for all these different projects and all these things. And so I did more research into school choice, and I started to see some things that I had never really thought of as benefit, rather than just, oh, well, it's a different school and I can take them out public school. Can you talk about some of the stats of like how school choice helps in terms of like inner city children, rate of like parent satisfaction with the school choice? You can go ahead and talk about maybe some of that stuff.
Sure. No, that's an important point, because that's really the point. The point is to make education better for our kids. The point is not necessarily, I mean, if choice didn't make things better, then why do it? But, this is a fundamental fact of human nature. When people have a choice to make, when you can choose to do X versus Y, you're going to go with what's better. That's just how it works. It's a market rule. And there is nothing more important for parents than their kids, and there's nothing more important than the education of their kids. So when you get parents involved in that and give them the ability, they are going to pick what works best. That's just the way it is. So what we've seen in past studies, if you look at various states that have implemented various forms of school choice, whether it's just charter schools or it's full on, education savings accounts or vouchers, what you always find is that not only do the schools that are being chosen improve. So if you choose to go to a charter or a private school, you'll get a quote better education based on the metrics. But the public schools improve as well. You'll find that the tide lifts all boats. The idea that school choice is only going to benefit those who actually make the choice is ridiculous. Because what happens is that the people who are seeing that their customers are leaving eventually decide to improve to keep those customers. I mean, that's just the way it works. Particularly, we've seen that with minorities, with Black people, with Hispanics, areas like that, because unfortunately, I think more so than anybody, they still tend to be ignored, and their needs tend to be ignored. They aren't as vocal and they don't tend to be as active in the general politics of things. I mean, it's an unfortunate truth. We would love to see that at my district. The District Parent Advisory Committee is largely a self-selected group of fairly affluent people generally white, who have the time. They have the time to do that. They're not out there working two jobs. They're not out there, trying to make a better living for their kids, slaving away at that stuff. They have it just nicer in general. So, the district's English Learner Advisory Committee has 4 or 5 people on it, instead of the 50 that we got. And they need to be represented more than anything, and what we see with school choice is that once they can choose other options, they will do that. They will actually make those choices, and that will force the public districts to get better and force them to pay attention to them. Plus, they can go to areas that specialize in areas that work for them. They can go to schools that have specialties that are better suited for their kids, and that improves everything as well. So, really, it is a rising tide that will lift all boats, and that includes minorities and low-income people and the underserved in general. And that's what we really want. When people talk about equity, we want to lift everyone up, not just those who have the ability to afford to take advantage of things right now.
Yeah, and that was a point. Something that I came across as well. And just a side note, if you are watching and you have a question for Todd, you can ask it in the chat, and I'm sure Todd would be happy to answer any question about school choice. If
Absolutely.
there's any parents tuning in, asking about how they can get involved, we can always talk about that later. Going back to that point about inner city children and minorities, it's funny how the argument is framed from the other side for those who are proponents of the public school system, who say, well, school choice is racist. It only benefits the wealthy, and it's always those affluent white people. But there's been studies to show that inner city children actually benefit the most because it allows them to get out of the neighborhoods that they were born into, that they had the unfortunate circumstances of being. And I guess one thing I was thinking about, I love thinking about like messaging and getting your message across, is in reality, opposing school choice is kind of racist because you're forcing people based on their situation or their race in that neighborhood to stay in that school that is failing them and not allowing them that opportunity to have access to a safe school, a great school that puts them on a good path for college or a career. Is your foundation focusing on getting that message to those communities that would support it and being sold on it and thinking, yeah, I would love to send my kid to a much better school outside of this neighborhood?
Yeah, we would love to reach out to those people. It's an evolving process, right now. I mean, we're getting materials translated into Spanish as much as we can. We're reaching out to the different minority groups as much as we can. It's still at the infancy stage when it comes to building a structure. We have over 10,000 people now across the state that are with us. So we've got a lot of people out there. But we do need to do a better job of reaching them, and that is more difficult. As I said, a lot of these people are people in those neighborhoods are working multiple jobs. Both mom and dad are working. They've got a lot of other things. They don't have the luxury in many cases to watch a Facebook Live event on a Friday afternoon at 3:00. So. We need to reach out to those people and get a hold of them. In the survey I mentioned, 71% of minority families were in favor of school choice. So they realize this. They know, that this is the solution for them. We just need to make them aware of the fact that we're out there so they can support us.
Okay. How much work, and you're part of the San Diego specific chapter, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm the San Diego County Chair.
Okay. How much work do you do with our local officials, as in terms of the county supervisors, different city council members, mayors? How much direct access or direct face-to-face do you have with those politicians?
We have met with various ones. I met the mayor of El Cajon at an event a while back. I was at an event with Jim Desmond last year. So we've had some contact with them. I can't say that we've gotten a lot of overt support in many respects because, we don't have the actual language out. A lot of them are waiting to see the text, of course, it's kind of a smart thing. They don't want to sign on to something until they actually know what we're really going to produce. So we're anticipating that we're going to get a lot more support from people up for election, people are running, so on and so forth, as soon as we have some real language out and we can go out and reach out to them. But we've been working with various groups, particularly people that we tend to stand side by side with people who are involved in the Recall Newsom effort at various events, because they were collecting signatures, and so were we. So we work with a lot of those, and particularly conservative groups. We speak at various conservative groups around the county periodically as well.
Okay. You've tried this before to sort of get this passed, right? Or this constitutional amendment passed, or?
A couple of school choice efforts happened, one in the 90s, one in the early 2000s. Both of them failed, unfortunately. I think it's largely because the climate is completely different now. As I said, people's eyes have been opened to how ill-served their children are by the public school system these days. Plus, there's been an evolution. I think that as we've seen in the state, many things are not getting better. That if anything, they tend to get a little bit worse year after year after year. And I think that applies to some degree to the public education system as well. I think that the education system we have now today is, demonstrably not as good perhaps as it was in the early 2000s or in the 1990s, which is not to say anything against the people involved. I mean, we have many, many family friends that are teachers who are awesome, totally dedicated, hard workers, smart people, so on and so forth. But the system as a whole, just is not working well for our kids. So that's what we need to change.
I had a thought, and I was going to bring it up, and I had a question, and I was going to piggyback. Sometimes that happens. I have too many questions bopping around in my head. So you've been a part of the Transparency Project. Did I get that correct?
Transparent California. I am actually,
California, right?
Yeah, I'm the research director for Transparent California. So if everybody out there has never gone to transparentcalifornia.com and checked it out, we publish the pay data, total compensation data for every public employee in the state of California, or at least as many as we can get every year. We currently have 28 million records online, so you can look up pretty much everyone that you could possibly imagine and find out how much they make. I'm in charge of that data collection. So we make almost 5,000 public record requests every year, and to every entity in the state of California. And then we take the resulting data and manipulate it into a standard format to upload it to the website. So, I mean, I would really, really particularly for your audience, I can tell you that anybody in your audience who doesn't know what Transparent California is should know. And certainly, if they have any heart conditions, they want to make sure and take their pills before they go online and check it out. They should be sitting down, because when you find out that your local city manager is making $500,000 a year, or your local superintendent is making $350,000 a year, or whatever the total amount is, you really want to be in good physical condition to take that.
Yeah, and you had told me a number in an email about teachers in general. It was like over $100,000. Can you talk about what salary is over $100,000 for a teacher that you're telling me about?
So one of the things that I've been battling, my pet project before I was in private industry, I was a project manager for a large manufacturer, $100 billion a year manufacturer. And a lot of what we looked at was, you're looking at actual data, you're looking at ROI, you're looking at, all of the budget issues, all this stuff. So my approach for schools to begin with was to look at the numbers. What I really like to look at is like, what are they actually spending our money on? Where is it actually going? Not what they talk about. So I spent years standing in front of school boards talking about when contract renewals come up and contract raises. And I would talk about, like, what are they actually making? How much money is actually being made by the employees in the school districts? Because you need that as a starting point. If someone's going to give you a raise, they want to know how much you're making to begin with, right? No one cares in the school districts. That's not where they start. So parents would get up there and they would say, oh, these poor education employees, they're barely living off cat food. We've got to give them a raise, because if we don't, they're going to have to live in a van down by the river, or something like that. So I looked at the data. So in 2019, which is the last year that we have full data on, we're working on 2020 right now. 2019, the total median compensation of a teacher in the state of California was $118,978 a year. That's total compensation, which of course includes their contribution for retirement as well as contribution for healthcare benefits. The pay level, I don't remember the exact number for just pay right now, but it's something like 92,000 a year is a total median for that. So I look at total compensation though, because I don't know if everybody knows this, but the state contributes 26% of every teacher's salary to their retirement plan every year. So if you can imagine how big your 401k would be if your employer contributed 26% of your salary to it every single year, that's what's happening in public education. So you have to call it total compensation, because if you don't, and you're just looking at pay, then you're only looking at part of the equation. So with the administrative staff, if you look at the administrative staff, that number is more like $160,000 a year, total median compensation. And if you look at any district, any district in the state of in San Diego County or in the state, it's pretty similar. I mean, there's districts in Victorville that might be less money, and San Francisco maybe a little more, but it is phenomenal. And with that, one of the analysis that I've done with the data analysis is to look at the increase rate. If you look at the rate of pay increase, it's almost 3 times the rate of inflation in many districts. So since 2012, we voted to increase taxes on ourselves. Very nice of us, right, to give more money to education. And since then, they've increased their own pay rate at a level almost 3 times the rate of inflation. So, you see what happens when we give them more taxes. It doesn't actually go to, does that improve education? Not by the numbers. If you look at the actual numbers, California School Dashboard, NAP results, SATs, all that stuff, we're basically flat. So an increase in revenue that's huge to the state, or to the school districts, has resulted in almost no measurable increase in education. So.
Yeah, that was shocking to me when you sent that number, because as an attorney, I when I got out of law school, even in San Diego, right in the city of San Diego, you would think California, it's San Diego, it's a metropolitan area. Most starting attorneys maybe make $70,000 a year starting off the bat. So when you sent that number to me, I was like, and total compensation is the smart way to do it, because you hear a lot of teachers who say, well, I only make X amount of dollars, but they always neglect to include, but I get this healthcare benefit paid for, I get this pension paid for, I get all this stuff added on. Like, that's one of the reasons why, sadly, it's some of the reasons why there are people become public school teachers, is because they know there's going to be all those benefits added on top of their pay. So in kind of now you kind of perk my interest about, because I'm a big fan of like looking at the numbers and transparent and looking at what people are doing in California. How much waste do you see, or do you even have an idea of how much waste you see in public schools? Because it seems like we keep giving more and more money to public schools, but we're not seeing a return on investment in terms of dollars when we hand it over to them.
Well, I mean, you have to define waste. If you look at the U.S. Census Bureau numbers for median compensation, they publish it every year. And if you look at the educational attainment numbers, which they publish and we have, in San Diego County, the average teacher, just in total pay, makes about $30,000 more than they would make with the same educational attainment if they worked in private industry or anywhere else. So is it waste to pay them $30,000 a year more than they would make? I mean, we hear from teachers often that they feel like they're underpaid, and they'll tell you that they feel that if they used their education somewhere else, they would make more money. In reality, of course, that's not true. They're being paid $30,000 a year more than they would make with the same education elsewhere. If you add in, I just did this analysis for Vista Unified. We had a webinar a couple of days ago to discuss with Vista Unified parents their compensation, their teacher comp. And in there, if you add in the extra benefits and the total median, the benefit over the total median in the county, they're making $46,000 a year more than they would make with that education doing something else in San Diego County. So now if we define that as waste, that's a huge number. I mean, that's because 80 or 90% of the budget of any school district is labor. So if you do that, if you look at administrative salaries, $160,000 total median comp for an administrator, that's fairly huge. One of the big issues of waste is the fact that we have 1,033 districts in the state of California, and probably 80% of them are very small. And each one of those has a superintendent that makes $250,000 a year, or 150 or 200,000. If we were just to consolidate some of those small districts, if we were to take every district under 1,000 students and somehow consolidate them, which is probably not possible, but if we could, we would probably save billions of dollars or have billions of dollars to spend on the education of our kids. But that's never going to happen, because if those small districts consolidate, then all the extra administration loses its job. It's the volume thing. You don't need 2 superintendents or 2 accounting departments or 2, whatever, when you do this kind of thing. So how much waste is there? I don't know if I can quantify the total, but I'm sure it adds up to billions of dollars a year.
I mean, just because you say they don't need it doesn't mean they wouldn't figure out how to try to need it.
Yeah. No.
How does this compare to? I mean, you work with charter schools. How is the compensation for a public school teacher compared to a private school teacher? I know there's different charter schools and religious schools and all that. So
yeah, that is kind of all over the mark. I can tell you, I don't have aggregate numbers for charter schools. We haven't been particularly, we haven't gotten a lot of charter school data. It's a little difficult because with public school data, we can go to a district and we can collect data on every school there is in that and every employee with one contact. With the charters, they each tend to be sort of their own unique entity. There's 13,060 of them, I think, right now. And so to go to each one of them is a fairly huge burden, and we don't really have the staff to do that. When we look at and just a side effect, I don't know if you know the Public Record Act, but all we can do is all we can ask for is existing documentation. So we can't say, give us the data in this format, which makes it easy for us to upload. We have to say, give it to us in whatever format you've got. And when that happens, then we have to have staff on our side that goes through and says, okay, well, this column of data is pay and this column is benefits, and does all that. So to do that for 1,300 charters is pretty overwhelming. So I can't say, but if you look at individual charters, you can browse the website and take a look at individual charters in your area. Typically, they do pay less than public schools, particularly total compensation, because charters are often on like a 401k plan, a defined contribution plan, and things like that. So, and they don't typically pay like a public school district might pay full boat for healthcare insurance. You pay nothing, and they have gold-plated compensation or plans. I mean, you cannot, if you go onto the Obamacare website and the ACA, and you look up like the best plan you can buy, the platinum plan, you can't pay as much for healthcare premiums as many of our school districts pay for their employees. I don't know how you find plans that are that expensive, to buy. There's just a certain amount of that goes on that's hard to compare apples to apples when it comes to the charters. So,
and of course, those like platinum healthcare plans are paid with tax dollars.
Yeah.
So we're paying for the highest healthcare plan that we as taxpayers can't even get access to.
Yeah. There's a water district somewhere in Northern California. I don't remember the name of it, but my executive director, Robert Fellner, uncovered the fact that they were paying something like $30,000 or $40,000 a year for their healthcare plan in premiums for their employees. And we highlighted that. We work with media all the time. You'll see Transparent California quoted all over the place when it comes to media using our numbers. And local media figured that out. They found that out. They put some pressure on. The water district changed its healthcare plan. And in 1 minute, they saved something like $6 million a year, I think, if I remember the number properly, because they just went out and shopped, just like any normal person who has budget constraints. Instead of just going, sure, whatever, we don't care where the money's going. They said, gee, now we should pay attention. And they found a plan that was significantly cheaper. So how much of that goes on is incalculable, really.
So kind of going back to the whole teachers union, and the name is escaping. Is the California Association of Teachers or California
California Teachers Association.
Teachers Association. I always get them mixed up.
Yeah.
When they were holding students hostage, meanwhile, private schools and charter schools were still having indoor classes.
Mm-hmm.
Did you look at their requests, or I guess in their terms, their demands as to what they needed to go back to school? Did you look at it and figure out how much of this was necessary and how much was not necessary? Because charter schools had already gone back and they'd figured it out, and they said, okay, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to put up the plexiglass. Everyone's going to wear masks. Like, we figured it out. But for some reason, the CTA had all these demands about putting new insulation in or putting new air ducts in and all that stuff. And it just seemed like it was an enormous list of demands that they were trying to get.
No, there were a huge list of demands, and it varied. The most famous is, of course, LA, the UTLA union there, that was demanding all kinds of, defunding the police and, doing all sorts of things that had no bearing whatsoever to going back to school. As a sidelight, I should tell you, I'm a co-founding member of an organization called the Parent Association. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with that. We had a lawsuit a couple of months ago that we were successful in going up against the state to declare the rules for keeping schools closed arbitrary, particularly the 6-foot distancing rule, which was preventing a lot of schools from opening. So we worked at that. That's in part a big reason why you saw a lot of schools opening up in April, because that ruling opened it up for a lot of schools that were holding off until then. But that kind of thing with the union has been an ongoing drumbeat throughout the entire thing. Every time you come up with they will set the bar, and then as soon as you make that bar, they raise it. In particular lately, a lot of those bars revolve around extra pay. If you look at some of the media reports, school districts right and left are giving themselves bonuses, incentive pay, raises. COVID funding is huge. My district is getting $60 million in COVID funding. It's about a third of its budget for COVID mitigation. There are other districts that are getting, I think San Diego Unified is getting almost $500 million in COVID mitigation funds. And the unions all over are seeing that and thinking, gee, we need a piece of that pie. So you'll see all kinds of districts that are increasing their pay or giving themselves bonuses or something with that funding. And I think, as with everything, that's what it all boils down to, is the money. People want to get their piece of the pie to get back to work, which is crazy. I mean, if you take someone whose median compensation is $118,000 and they tell you that they need another, $5,000 or whatever it is to actually go back to work. I mean, talk to somebody who works at Walmart about that. It's crazy, the idea that has to happen.
So a question did just come in. They're asking, can you talk about non-classroom online charter schools? Sure.
So non-classroom, that's what AB 1316 was the most in danger of hurting. Non-classroom, we mean distance learning. These are the charter schools that stepped up. Back when in May of 2020, when everybody was shutting down and distance learning through the public schools was just miserable, which I don't fault them for, because it's not their thing. They weren't designed to do distance learning. So I don't really fault their teachers for not instantly being experts. But the online charters were, the non-classroom based online charters were experts at that, and they stepped up. They were kneecapped by the legislature because their funding was frozen. So even though the public schools were being held harmless, they were getting the same funding that they had the year before, even though their enrollment was dropping. The online schools were growing, but they weren't being given any extra money. So they wanted to be out there taking care of our kids. They wanted to take on more, but they weren't allowed to by the funding rules, even though some of them did just to do it. And then what their thanks for that, thank you for taking care of my kids, was AB 1316. Now let's go in and let's cripple your operation. There were all kinds of regulations that were going to happen in AB 1316.
So this is a perfect transition. Even the good news that AB 1316 had went into the inactive pile. It's still important for people to understand very portions of it. What kind of made your eyes pop looking at?
Focus is implementing school choice, which would make it a moot point. But I can tell you from what I've seen is that a large part of it involved restricting the ability of charters to go out and get students that were not directly in the local district that they serve, which is, of course, a lot of what non-classroom based online schools do. There's no reason why a distance learning charter that's located in Oceanside, California, can't serve kids everywhere. I mean, you could have kids in Russia, learning from their school. There's no reason not to. If they're good at it, they're good at it. The Khan Academy, if anybody's looked at that, the Khan Academy is just awesome. And the fact that they're not located in my city doesn't make them any less awesome. So, that would have been crippled by this. It would have given the local districts a lot more power to restrict their enrollment, to control their enrollment, to deny them access to extra students. There were a lot of regulations, which I don't know the details of, but I know there were a lot of regulations in AB 1316 that would have made it difficult for charters to exist and also to expand and grow. So there were a lot of things in it that were really just bad. And it's just, as you say, it's a continuing process. Last year, there was AB 1503, 1504, 1505. Every single year, there is legislation in our government that is designed to cripple charter schools. Just not a year doesn't pass without having something there that's designed to impede them in their jobs. And some of it, I kind of believe that in some respects, charters should be subject to some of the same transparency and regulation that public schools are. We should be on an even footing. But on the other hand, some of it is just punitive. Some of it is just designed to do nothing but protect the existing system. So I'm very happy that it was tabled. Now tabled means that it could actually come back itself next year, or they could modify it in some way and bring it back as well, which is of course why we need to be out there voting for the right people to begin with, and then we can just all vote for school choice in 2022 and then make the point moot, remove their ability. So
I've always found it interesting as a state. California likes to prop itself up as the state of innovation and progress. This is where Apple came from, and Microsoft and Tesla, and it's always and Facebook and all these different big tech companies. And we're California is where the future happens. But for some reason, schools, they're just stuck in the past. It just seems like we're just going to keep doing this archaic system that has gotten much worse over the past couple decades, as opposed to investing in different styles of teaching, different styles of schooling. And you would think that charter schools would be right in their wheelhouse, but I think that could be a union issue, that could be a political issue, it could be, who's making the money off of public schools, and that could be stopping why there's not more focus from the state.
Well, charters were an invention of teachers. When charter schools started, they were started by teachers, because teachers they understood the fact that they needed a way to escape some of the bounds that they're bound under with the public rules, to innovate, to create new methods of teaching, to design different ways of doing things. They started it, and it was awesome. I mean, you could see all kinds of changes happening. I mean, if you look at different charters, they have all kinds of different ways of teaching that are more tuned to what individual students need and individual populations. So it's kind of crazy that it has evolved to the point where teachers generally consider the teachers union. Now, I need to separate something right here. We need to separate teachers from teachers union, because teachers, who I know a lot of, are, as I said, awesome people. Like they're 90% of them are probably have nothing but the best interest of our kids in mind. Maybe 99% of them, I don't know. But their union, of course, has their best interests in mind. That's what they want to promote, what works for them. But and that seems to be the opposition to charters. I can tell you, I've talked to a bunch of individual teachers, and outside of repeating some union talking points, they try to make a few points about charters. The fact that charters to some degree can be selective, not that they can by law. I mean, they have to take everybody. They have to do a lottery. They can't choose, unlike the common misconception. They don't get to pick and choose the best students so that they look good. But on the other hand, parents that are into school enough to realize that a charter exists and they have an option tend to be more involved, and involved parents have higher performing kids. That's just the way it is sometimes. So it does end up being that way. But often what I see with teachers is that they don't really oppose the idea of charter schools. They just go with what their union wants them to do and oppose it in that way. If you've ever read anything by Rebecca Friedrichs, she's got a book called Standing Up to Goliath, which goes through the details of the union viewpoints and all the harassment that she went through when she decided as a teacher to not oppose charter schools and not oppose school choice during the last couple of rounds. And it's just eye-opening in terms of the pressure that goes on inside the system to make sure that teachers are all towing the line and repeating, what they need to repeat. So.
Mm-hmm. So there's another question that came through, and I didn't know this was a thing. Do you think there was an ulterior motives why charters had to do the state testing and public schools had a choice to do it or not?
I'm not really familiar with that. I didn't know that there were different rules. I know that the public schools are not held to the same standard for state testing. There's still the federal government, I believe, still requires that they do testing, but they aren't measuring they used to have a bar you had to hit. A certain percentage of your students needed to take the test. So there was some incentive for the school to actually go out and get kids to do it. It's one of the fundamental problems with our testing systems right now is that there are no stakes. So, like anything, the kids are going to kind of float to the lowest. Some kids, I should say, are going to, not put a lot of effort into it because it doesn't mean anything. So, it takes some work to get a lot of kids, a significant percentage, to actually take those tests. Now, I didn't know that there was a difference between the requirements in charters versus public when it came to that right now. I'd have to look into that. So I'm sorry, Heather, but I can't really answer that question for you.
So if anyone has any more questions, we'll be finishing up in a couple minutes, so Todd could answer any more questions you might have. Talk a little bit about how you can get involved with your organization and how you can help and how you can support and all that stuff to get involved.
Sure. So we need an army. We are going to have an army against us. We know that the CTA collects $1,400 per teacher per year in dues. That's tens of millions of dollars. We know that they're the largest political campaign contribution donor in the state of California by far. We know they're not going to like it. We know that they can just essentially order their membership out to wave signs and knock on doors and, do all that stuff. And we're just volunteers. I mean, we've got nothing more than a table and a pile of Little Caesars pizzas, to motivate our people. So we need that army. So for right now, what everybody could do the best would be to go to californiaschoolchoice.org. That's californiaschoolchoice.org, and add their name to our supporter list. We're building a list of supporters for a couple of reasons. One is because at some point we're going to need people to get out there and collect real signatures. We're going to need people out in front of every grocery store, every bank, every home improvement center, every church, every school. We're going to need people out there. We have to collect 1 million signatures, and we're going to need 1.5 million to survive the challenges that are going to happen. So we need a lot of people out there. But by adding your name, you'll be in the loop. You'll get emails periodically. You can join us on our Zoom meetings and find out how things are going. But that's number one. But number two of that is that we are going to be going out to deep pockets. We are going to be going out to the people in California who understand the importance of school choice, who know what it needs to be done, and who have the money to write checks. And for that, those kind of people are smart. They're very smart. And they don't want to give $1 million or something like that to an organization that's just going to lose. That's not what people like that do. And so if we can get 50,000, 100,000, however many number of supporters we can, that demonstrates the fact that we're building an organization that can not only make this happen, but survive in the future as well. So by going on there, signing up, putting your name on the list, that helps tremendously. Of course, you can volunteer. If you're listening to this in San Diego, if you check off the volunteer box, when you do that, you come to me. That name comes to me. I get in touch with you and I say, okay, what organization do you belong to? You know, are you in a church group? Are you in a school group? Are you in a Kiwanis club? Do you do a bunko night with your friends? Are you in a motorcycle gang? You know, is there some organization that we can reach out to, and you can be the point person to help us gather support there. So that's number one, would be, of course, volunteer. We love that. Number two, donate. You know, I mean, we are hoping to get some big checks from donors who understand the importance of this. But on the other hand, you know, if anybody out there has $5 a month that they want to put in there and help support us, that's the kind of thing that gets those people out. You know, it lets us buy petitions. We have to get the petitions printed, and it's all got to be, you know, the rules. It's got to be like one page. It's a special print. It's not like just printing it on your printer. You know, it's got to be this weird long paper and all this stuff. That's going to be expensive. We need signage. You know, we need to get the word out. There's probably going to be ads, you know, being run. So, you know, every little dollar helps as far as that goes. So CaliforniaSchoolChoice.org, add your name to the list. Donate, volunteer if you can, because we need the help. And if you can't volunteer time, you know, donate a few bucks. We would really appreciate that. So, thanks.
Do you guys have a social media presence?
Yeah. We have California School Choice or groups, Facebook groups for every county. There is a Master California School Choice Facebook page that you can go to. We publish multiple articles a day on there, you know, relevant things. So you can go there. You can join your local Facebook group there's a School Choice 2022 San Diego Facebook group. We do that. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. You know, there are other media things that we're looking at, you know, things like Telegram and you know, other sources as well. But yeah, we need to get the word out on that too. We've gathered almost 2,000 supporters just through Facebook outreach in the last month or two. So we're looking for a lot of support there as well.
So what's the handle for Instagram? Because I'll make sure I go out and share it as well.
Yeah, I have to look it up. It's something like
okay.
California. It's something like California School Choice 2022.
Okay.
I have to look that up for you because I don't actually know offhand what that is.
Okay.
But
I'm sure I could find it if I do enough digging in.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm a fairly active Facebook user, but I'm just not an active Instagram user. So I don't monitor that. We have someone who handles that process, you know, for us. So I'd have to ask him. But
no problem. I would suggest this: if you could get yourself an army of badass moms in California, because I've always found that with every cause worth fighting for, it's always been the badass moms on the front line, you know, out there protecting their families. And if you can get an army of them to volunteer for this, you're in a good position, because they will be out there and they will crusade for this cause.
That is what we do. I mean, if I look at my volunteer base in San Diego, I have 75 volunteers at the moment. It's the largest number of any county in the state. And I can tell you that probably 80 or 90% of them are badass moms. You know, I don't know if everybody saw the news, but there was a rally in Poway Unified yesterday and made the big news. KUSI covered it, a bunch of media sources. The people who did that were my badass moms. And, you know, they got out there and waved signs and gathered people and made a splash in the media. They were protesting critical race theory. You know, which is, you know, school choice is the antidote to all that stuff. You know, if you don't want your kids to be exposed to a certain curriculum, pick a different school. You know, that's what we need to do. That's what we need to do to send the message to the other schools that we don't like this, you know. So they were out there promoting that. So yeah, they're grizzly moms. They're not, you know, kitty cat moms. So
yeah. And by doing so, if you allow school choice and they propose something like critical race theory, and then they see people turning and leaving, it's just free market choices to show, well, we don't approve of this. We're going to vote with our vouchers or our tax dollars and go somewhere else.
Yeah. And I'll tell you personally, I haven't studied CRT. I don't know. I mean, I from what I hear about it, it's just not a good idea in general, but I don't have a particular opinion. But I do have the opinion that you should be able to choose. If you want
Mhm.
your kids to go to a school that focuses on those social agenda things, by all means, send them there. I'm fine with
Mhm.
that. If you don't, you shouldn't have to send them there either, though. So, school choice is the answer to that. Everybody gets to pick.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for reaching out and asking to come on. It was great talking with you. I'm sure a lot of listeners are going to get a lot of good information about school choice and about your plans. I didn't even know you guys were proposing a constitutional amendment, so that's new to me. I will keep a lookout. I'll find your handle on Instagram, and I'll promote it, and I'll promote it out to some of those badass moms who can just spread the word even more.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and thanks for your. I just discovered your podcast a month or two ago as well, and I'm sorry I missed it. I listened to Melanie Burkholder. Melanie is a co-founder of the Parent Association that I'm involved with. I know her well, and I can
Mhm.
tell you that it was an awesome interview, and everybody here needs to look for her on the ballot if you're in her area. Coming up to those are the kind of people we need in our legislature. We need
Yep.
people like that. So thank you very much for your promotion for the general ideals that will make our state and our country a better place. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. You mean I don't want to get started on the whole thing about the state legislature. We could talk for a whole nother hour on the state legislature and how important it is to get people like Melanie Burkholder in there.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I will definitely push this out and get more people, more eyes onto this because this is an important topic for California. And again, thank you for coming on.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Todd.
Yep. Bye bye.